first, I'd like to bring another regional powers or regional states to this equation. As you know, prior to the assassination, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu flew to Saudi Arabia for a secret meeting with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, which would mark the first known encounter between senior Israeli and Saudi officials. It is all known by now that Trump was supportive of Israel's normalization process with the Gulf states, especially United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia. And therefore, it was argued that Trump administration, who was supporting this assassination in order to break Iran's resistance in the Middle East region, if it's possible to make Iran wage a war against regional powers. And thus, Iran has no chance to return to the table for the nuclear deal negotiation. So how do you read this picture, Scott?
I think that there's like a wide picture here, and then there's certain specifics, including the assassination of Farzadeh. When you talk about the Netanyahu MBS meeting, look, you start with it. Israel and Saudi Arabia have a common interest in containing Iran, but they've got a difference or a potential difference in how you contain Iran. You know, the Israelis, or at least Netanyahu, has been willing to countenance military strikes in the past, and the Saudis know that. The Saudis don't want military strikes. Military strikes on Iran bring the possibility of an escalation, which could include Iran or its allies hitting Saudi facilities. We saw that with the attack last September on Aramco's facilities via drones. So I would suspect that you've got two different paths. I think the broader path, which is quite clear, is that Israel is pursuing normalization with Arab countries, including Saudi allies, such as the UAE and Bahrain. And Israel's, like, big, as it were, payoff would be normalizing relations with the Saudis. But that's not going to happen while the Saudi king, Salman, is still alive. Because while Salman is still alive, the Saudis are sort of committed to that idea of the 2002, Arab peace initiative, which isn't going anywhere over Israel-Palestine, but it was what, that was the monarchy's big, goal. Mm-hmm. So when
by the way, by the way, do you think King Salman knows this relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia with the crown prince?
Salman notices.
He's aware of this?
He's aware of this. And it's just that there's a difference between what you do privately and what you do publicly. So privately, Israel and the Saudis have been developing links for years. Publicly, how much do you display it? That brings in the question not only of a presentation vis-a-vis Iran, but remember that Israel and Iran have got a common interest in also putting a signal out to Turkey. And so people tend to forget this, is that the idea of this Israel-Saudi cooperation is facing both ways. So I think politically, you're going to continue to see the signals which go out from both countries that they welcome, cooperation. They welcome a stable Middle East. But that means that the Israelis, when it comes to their covert attacks, like the assassinations, and of course, any military attack, I think they've got to be careful. I don't think Netanyahu would have discussed this with MBS, but I think he probably would have said to the Crown Prince, look, we're going to be putting some more pressure on Iran. Because a few days before the assassination, if you noticed, Israel's top correspondent on these matters, a journalist named Barak Ravid, said something's going to happen in Iran very soon. We just didn't know what it was. As long as the Israeli covert operations do not lead to Iran making a military response, Saudis will be okay with this, right? But here's the big question. We know that Israel and Saudi Arabia were both very wary about the talks that led to the 2015 nuclear deal. The Americans told the Saudis, told the Israelis, this will contain Iran, this will contain Iran. Israel and Saudi Arabia weren't quite sure about that. 2020, will the Biden administration be able to persuade the Israelis and the Saudis, look, you need to get a negotiation with Iran. In other words, you need some type of security of an agreement rather than the unpredictability of no agreement. You know, it's the same dilemma. Difference here, in 2015, MBS had just taken up his position at that point as defense minister. He was just marking this rise to power and still, as it were, feeling his way. Netanyahu's been around for, seems like 100 years. So that hasn't changed much. But of course, he's under a great deal of pressure in Israel. So there's a lot of variables, which mean we can talk about the possibilities of what happens between Israel, Saudi, the Americans, and the Iranians, but we don't know for sure which way this will go.
Okay, so as far as I understand, you draw pictures that it is really complicated, and there are many variables that each state can take on. And actually, this leads us to what Biden will do about this.